Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. That was like a channel. Usually I'm a much more like channel. Intros will just like forever be awkward for me, but here we are. It is a lot easier now that I know that I'm actually talking to people. It used to be really hard when I was like, no one's out there. Anyways, irrelevant. Hi, welcome back. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn. Okay, what is wrong with me today? And I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back to our True Crime Wine Wednesday. I am saucy today. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like this sauciness that's coming out of me. We'll get to that in 1 minute. But hey, if you like wine, if you're into true crime, or just hanging out amongst friends, you should definitely hit that subscribe button right here. I think I got it right this time. You don't have to like wine either. If you're more of a tea drinker, pop, water, snack eater. Maybe you're just rolling up a little Duborama right as we speak. Whatever it is, we love and accept you all. So come join us every Wednesday. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor today, our friends over at NordVPN. You guys know I love my VPN, and I'm even more thankful for it right now because Love Island UK is back on. I got hooked when I was visiting my best friend in London a couple of years ago, and I've just been dying for it to come back. And that's actually how I originally got a VPN, and then as we all know, I stopped paying for my VPN, and what do you know it, I got hacked. Which is why it's obviously more important to have than just watching Love Island. If you're new here, several months ago, somebody hacked my computer, stole like all of my accounts, credit cards, identification. They just went on a heyday. And that whole process is just so violating. Like just knowing somebody was in your business, was able to get all of that information. Like that is the ickiest part of the whole thing. And so having a VPN, basically what it will do is it just encrypts all of your information and it runs your VP from other areas in the world so that people can't do what they did to me. Just the headache of all of that. And that reason alone, that is why I would 20 out of 10 recommend getting one. You do not want to go through the same thing. So if you're interested in doing that and, you know, maybe watching Love Island with me as well. Right now, the team over at NordVPN is offering a summer discount when you use the code Sherrilyn for their 2-year protection plan, plus a bonus gift with a huge discount on top of that. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which I really like, so you can just try it out for yourself. Make sure you like it. I know you will. I'm going to leave a link for you guys in the description below so you can go check them out. I'm also going to leave a link to their YouTube channel so that you can get a lot more information on even more benefits for yourself. They've got a huge library for you guys to go through and learn more of like the techie side of things that I'm not able to articulate. So thank you, NordVPN. We love and appreciate you so much over here. Thank you for protecting us and just keeping this channel going. Cheers. Okay, let's get started. Mama's pretty fired up today. I'm drinking water because I know that if I have any wine or alcohol at all, I am just gonna go on a whole other tangent and I'm gonna be like extra saucy. I was so disappointed that I couldn't get part 2 out last week for you because I've just been like sitting on my like sauciness and getting like more boiled up. You know, like there's just a time where you just gotta get it out there, get what you have to say out there and then be done with it. And I didn't have that leisure last week because me and the girls were pretty sick, so we're feeling better. But guys, whoa, let me tell you, I have triggered some people out there about this case. And I will say that I can appreciate when somebody is passionate about their opinion, even when it doesn't match mine. You know, often that's a great way to learn new information is when you can have a conversation or a discussion about the way somebody else sees something besides yourself and, you know, talks amongst each other, fit clues together. However, the comments that were coming at me were not cool. It was not like that. It was like attacks. It was obvious there was a discussion going on in a group that I'm not gonna mention from another channel as well because they all started like flooding in at the same time. And I ended up having to delete a lot of the comments and got a lot of pushback from that saying like, oh, you delete when people don't agree with you. And that's not the case at all. I'll delete you for your blatant disrespect. Like if you start something like screaming at me in caps and start insulting my ability to research or to deliver a story or accusing me of not providing my viewers with all of the information before I'm even done Keep in mind, like, we're at part 2 now. That was just part 1. Like, let me finish, but don't insult me. You'll notice I'm wearing a sleeveless shirt today so that I can show off my tattoos, because the comment I received was that tattoos were meant for convicts and sailors. Like, don't come out here insulting me to try to prove your point. It's just not something I'm going to tolerate on my channel. It's not what my comment section is about. I am able to have a respectful, open conversation if you want to share your side in that way, but not if you just blast me with insults. So, sorry. I'm not even going to mention the main channel or the page that this all started in, because I don't believe in sending my supporters to try and intimidate and bring somebody else down. And I realize that this case is sensitive. It's very controversial, and it's because there are people out there who are passionate in believing that these 3 were guilty and that the investigators got it right the first time. And I can't change that. That is your opinion. I have mine. I just don't appreciate being accused of not researching or seeing other sides when I have, and I just see evidence differently than you might. And I think I just would have appreciated having the opportunity to get this second part out, to go through all of that like in-depth stuff before you just came and blew my shit up. Today is going to be a long one. We have a lot to go through, and I'm sorry if it's not all. I'm trying to make it as streamlined as humanly possible. I think I have my notes as organized as I'd like them to be, but it might feel like a little kind of back and forth here and there, just because I've added things throughout this week that I wasn't going to touch base on, because I felt like it was evidence that was reaching to try to prove that these guys were guilty, and I just didn't even feel like some of it was worth noting. But I want to go through the majority of it now, because I want you to understand, if you don't see things the way I do, why I see it that way. Not trying to change your opinion at all. I just want to explain why I stand where I stand and why I'm comfortable sharing a video like this with my community, because I feel confident enough in my decision. So today we're going to pick up where we left off. If you haven't seen part 1, I would definitely go and check that out, just because this will make a lot more sense to you if you do. Unless you're already familiar with the case and you're just kind of wanting to go through evidence on both opinions and how each side views it, then you might be okay with just sticking here. Just a quick synopsis to remind yourself, we left off with Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly being arrested for the murders of Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. The investigators on this case felt like the boys were victims of a satanic ritual, primarily due to injuries that they felt were consistent with torture and mutilation. Something I didn't make really clear in the last video was, keep in mind, this was the early 90s, and in the 80s and 90s, there was this whole satanic panic thing. Satanic panic? I don't know why I'm accentuating so much. This was the time of satanic panic. Why am I saying it so weird? We're just not even gonna try anymore. I had people comment actually on the last video that they remember growing up in that time, and that their parents would burn their CDs because they believed that the devil was sending messages to them through like rock music and like heavy metal. It just reminded me of the movie Detroit Rock City, where she like burns all of his albums and his Kiss tickets, and him and his friend have to try to go and get to the concert. They go on this big road trip. Great movie, but this kind of stuff was actually going down. So when you already have that panic and fear within your communities, and then you see the condition that the boys were in, I mean, part of me understands, and I can't blame somebody for initially having that connection. In my opinion, though, I felt that instantly going to that route just left blinders on, and they've not been able to focus on anything else since then. We know from last week that the boys ended up getting charged basically because Jesse Miskelly confessed to it and tied Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin to the crime with him. Part of one of the arguments that was being blasted at me was that I said that Jesse confessed after being questioned for 12 hours and really it was like 4. To which my reply was, I don't care if he had confessed after 7 minutes. If he was led to the story the way he was. The time frame changed nothing for me in regards to him not knowing anything about the crime. And there is hours from the interview that is missing. But even if we are just going off of the recorded confession, you can hear right in there that he's still being led to say certain things and that time frames aren't being acknowledged when he's getting them wrong. The time to me and how long he was interrogated for really is irrelevant because it doesn't change the fact that he didn't know anything about it. And I know there's the argument that, oh, he did that to throw people off. Again, to me personally, it doesn't make sense because this is when he's supposed to be like, oh, okay, yes, I'm going to help you now. Like, I'm implicating myself. He's past throwing anybody off. You know, you throw people off when you deny things, not implicate yourself in like a way that doesn't add up to the evidence. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. It also doesn't make sense to me because I don't think that he's able to rationalize and think things through as like, oh, trying to be sly and turn people away from evidence that in the future isn't going to add up to his confession. In the last video, we talked about how his IQ was a 74 and that even his dad had pulled him out of school so that he could focus on a trade and excel there because academically it just wasn't working for him. And this is a topic that also was very aggressively brought forward to me. One comment that really upset me was that they said Jesse was no R word and that he was told to lie on his IQ test to score lower. First of all, we don't use that term anymore, sir. So let's just get that addressed. Second, it is very clear that Jesse is not scoring high on an IQ test, whether it's a little bit higher than what he scored. Again, there's no proof of that. I don't believe that. Is he able to function in society? Absolutely. The reason for bringing up his score is not to say that he doesn't know what he's saying or doing. For me, it just puts into perspective why he might crumble under pressure a little bit easier, how he doesn't deal with like really stressful situations and just kind of like panics and does whatever he can to get himself out of it. And ultimately, where you score on an IQ test, I guess, doesn't really even have any basis to it because there have been people who confess to crimes with extremely high IQs and they never did it. Like, this happens every single day. So my point in acknowledging his score is not even to set him apart from people who have higher IQs or lower IQs. It's just to put into perspective that he's got some limitations working against him. Some of the sites that I read through that really believe that these men are guilty, there's a lot of focus on those types of things, like Jesse not being as slow as he said. Another big one that really rubbed me the wrong way is Damien Eccles' mental health history. And this is really, really hammered in. We did talk in the last video briefly about him spending some time in a mental health facility on several occasions. While he was there, he did tell mental health professionals that he was suicidal and possibly homicidal. There was also a report of him licking blood off of another patient, which gross. In terms of this case, though, it doesn't change anything for me. Damien was a shit disturber. He was extremely angsty. He was like emo before like emo was emo. And he's the first to admit that he stirred the pot as a kid and just wanted to ruffle feathers and wanted to make people uncomfortable. It doesn't make him very likable. It doesn't make me like some of the things that he did, but I have no right to judge somebody based on what they're going through, especially in your late teens. Man, that time is shitty enough. So when you add on some mental health issues, it's not fun. And is spending time in a mental health facility and being suicidal and saying and doing certain things to get a reaction out of somebody because of your own pain and trauma makes you a killer, then I am sure glad that I was never suspected of a crime growing up. It made me really thankful that I was never an outcast in my town with my mental health history. And it makes me really angry that this is one of the main things that people talk about and just like throw in your face. Oh, read these reports, read this. And it's like, I have, and I feel bad for him. I can obviously see somebody who is hurting, who is extremely lost, and who needs help. In my opinion, it looks like a coping mechanism. It looks like he was wanting to protect himself by pushing people further away, doing like the most outlandish thing he could, like licking blood off somebody because people were already accusing him of being like this devil worshiper, always in his dark clothes and trench coat. He didn't fit in, so he was like, you want me to show you how I don't fit in? Like, I'll really show you how out there I can be. Listen, if my social media was public in my early 20s or late teens, I would be painted so poorly, when really I was just a lost girl. Like, I can't even say that I was a young woman. I felt like just a girl there who was very lost, very hurt. And I coped with it in shock value. Prime example, I posted a photo of myself as a child, a little girl. I think I was probably like 4 years old. I've got like a bandana wrapped around my head. It's the only thing I'm wearing. I'm naked and I'm like posing underneath my Christmas tree. And I tagged it something like, hey, Pee Wee Herman, one for the spank bank. Yeah. This was an effort for me to make a shocking child abuse joke to deal with my own trauma and like protect myself. And like, what does that even mean? Like, Pee Wee Herman, I think he like got busy in like a movie theater, or like a porny movie theater. But as far as I know, he was never accused of sexually abusing children. But here I am, reckless, hurt, not treating my mental illness appropriately, and just posting shit like that. So for Damien, I see it as using and embodying this dark entity that people think of him and just being as shocking as he possibly can. When you make people uncomfortable when you're hurt like that, it's a way to protect yourself. He wanted people to leave him alone. He admits that he was very depressed. He was going through stuff, and oftentimes when you're in that low point, you don't care what people think about you. You don't care about the repercussions of doing outlandish things or saying things that are going to rub people the wrong way. You don't think it's going to be used against you in the future to accuse you of a crime so horrific. I know that it's still hard for people to accept. I know that once you have your mind made up, you are not going to be able to see mental illness perhaps the way that I have, because I've personally dealt with it, and it makes me feel like you're very lucky, because if this doesn't make sense to you, if this doesn't resonate with you, then you probably either personally haven't dealt with it or don't know somebody very close to you that has. But because of my history and strong history in my family, I see it very differently. Something else that's used against him a lot is that he would go on walks, and they were often just aimless walks. Like, he would just walk around with really no direction or not knowing where to go. And his dad felt like Damien was lost, and he was always like searching for something and couldn't just like stay still. Like, he always had to be on the move. People's beliefs with this is that it shows that he was familiar with the streets in the area. From what I see though, again, I'm not a medical professional, but I see his walks as a way for him to keep busy and try to just do his best to turn off the noise. I felt that way when I heard him speak about it, where he said he would often just go out and leave the house and walk for hours at a time, feeling like a yearning in his heart that he had to get somewhere and that he would feel relief, and it'd be like, oh, okay, like I've accomplished it, I've arrived at my destination, but he just couldn't. Like, he's always restless, and there was no way of like easing that. Again, it's something really relatable for me, because that's like that anxiety, you know, like no matter what you do, it's on the back of your head. You're trying to turn it off. You're distracting yourself any way you can. So I saw the walking as a coping mechanism for him to just like keep busy. I can appreciate the fact that this case also took place in the 90s, where mental health was not talked about as openly as it is today. We are still not where we need to be, but if we look back at where things were in the 90s, you did not talk about your mental health very openly, and part of it was because it was used against you, like I have been seeing in this case. I mean, if you said you had bipolar, people looked at you like you were Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There was a good side and an evil side to you. Nobody knew what bipolar really entailed unless you had it. Depression meant you were just going to kill yourself at any moment, and maybe anybody else around you. ADHD was you were a delinquent, you were hard to control. If you were on Ritalin, basically people just felt like you were gonna be foaming at the mouth and like rabid if you didn't have it. So it just bothers me when some of this evidence is used to hold over his head still, when we have gotten quite a bit farther and can understand that having any of these mental health issues does not make you a bad person. Another thing that I saw with this whole walking thing come into play was that it showed that Damien was a liar, because at the time he said that he was familiar with the areas and would go for walks. But as the years have gone on and as he's like retold his story, he distanced himself more from the area, and he says that he was not there often. Personally, if I was in his shoes and I had at one time admitted that, yeah, I know the area, very familiar with the woods, I know what you're talking about, and you're okay to put yourself in an area that you had been before because you trust the legal system and you know that it's not going to lead back to you just because you went on a walk or you were known in the area that you killed 3 children, and then it ends up turning on you and using all that against you, I would distance myself from it too. I personally see like some of the changes in his statements as more carefully worded. Like he's very aware of what he is saying now and not just like so liberal with his terms. I mean, for a teen saying, oh yeah, I'm familiar, I've been there often, it could mean something completely different as a grown adult. Like it does often mean I was there 2 weeks ago and I was there this week, so I know what you're talking about. Does it mean you were there every day? Like, we don't know. And the term means something different to absolutely everybody. Unless you're being extremely specific, which hasn't been, we don't know what often could be. And then him saying, oh, I wasn't there that often. Okay. Again, to me, does not prove that he's a killer. I just see it as being more choosy with your wording because you're under a microscope. Everything you say is dissected, not only for Damien, Jason, and Jesse, but even people who were involved in this case and were used as witnesses, or people who supported their claims that they had alibis. Phone records, for example. One of the arguments of their guilt is that Damien had spoken to several girls throughout that evening, but some of them couldn't account for where he was between 6:30 and 9, which is when investigators believe something happened. And an argument that I saw was that the defense didn't use these girls that could have been used. They call them phone girls. They weren't used to prove that Damien was home talking because they couldn't account for where he was. And that's because although he said he was home, really he wasn't. And then when they did speak to him, he said that he was out with Jason. We know that he was with Jason earlier on in the day, and then he and his girlfriend left Jason's house, dropped her off. He went to family friend's house, and then he went back home with his mom. So they're taking what these girls are saying, that when they finally did talk to Damien, he said he was with Jason. Well, he was with Jason at one point. Like, to me personally, it means nothing, because I remember those days where your friends would call the house sometimes and there was just moments where you didn't want to talk, or there were certain people that you just didn't want to talk to. So you told your parents to say that you were out doing something or you weren't available, which is what Damien's mom had done. She did tell some of the people who called that evening that he was busy. Just because he doesn't take a call doesn't mean anything. And when he did speak to them, he had been with Jason at one point in that day, so that wasn't a lie. But he had also been with his girlfriend, so I saw it as, him not maybe wanting to disclose that he had been spending time with his girlfriend if he's talking to another girl. Maybe he's keeping his options open. I don't know. What I know is his mom said he was home, and him not taking phone calls from people within a certain amount of time doesn't make me not believe her. Unfortunately, a simple solution of going between this back and forth would be to pull phone records, because there was a friend that he spoke to in Tennessee who says that she did speak to him before that 9 p.m. time frame, which would show that he was home, but they were never pulled. Personally, without phone records, there are no facts. There's no proof, because somebody's version and trying to rely on memory and an exact time is just as credible as Damien's account. Why is somebody else's word more than his, or more than his mom's, or more than the family friends who had seen him that evening? These phone girls were used to prove an exact time of when he was gone, which nobody can do. And not because they're liars, but because we just don't look at the clock every single minute of the day. So when you're rounding up a time, being like, oh, I think it was between, 6 and 9, really, you could have talked to him at 7 and just not known. And it's just because at each step of the day, you're not like, okay, right now I'm making a bagel and it is 10:15 a.m. Perfect. Oh, I hear my neighbor's lawnmower going off. It is 2:30, so they are home. If anybody comes to me, 2:30, they were mowing their lawn. Like, we don't do that. Although I feel like we should now. I just personally feel like when I read through facts that are used to show their guilt, so much of it is reaching, and a lot of it is a double standard, because someone's word can be taken over Damien's if it fits their narrative. That happens a lot in this case. There's one witness who spoke for Damien, saying that she had spoken to him that night, and that the time she spoke to him, it would have overlapped with when it's believed that these crimes were committed. And she says when they talked, she had asked like what he had done, and he said that he was out with Jason, and then after he had been taken somewhere by his mom. The prosecutor asked whose mom, and she said Jason's. But Jason's mom worked till 11 p.m. that night. So they took that as Damien being a liar by telling her that, when in fact he was picked up by a mother. It was his own. We know she picked up him and his girlfriend. Just for context, on one of the sites that I was reading, in addition to strong focus on mental health making you a killer, it was noted quite a few times that he had a pregnant teenage girlfriend. This is like another notch against him. Like, why? Why do you have to add she's a pregnant teenage girlfriend? Again, so freaking glad I was never under a microscope in my teens, because teen mom, had my child at 19 years old. Heaven forbid. Anyways, the mother that picked him up, it was Damien's mom. So maybe she was confused. I don't really have an explanation for her. And I also don't know what benefit would have been for him telling if it was his mom or Jason's mom that picked him up anyways. Like, it's irrelevant. What I can't get around, and why I'm so steadfast in where I stand, is that a lot of the witnesses who were used against the boys have recanted their statements, and evidence that was initially viewed by experts to prove that this satanic ritual went down has since been reviewed by other independent experts, and they see something completely different, and that implodes the entire case. If these 8-year-old boys weren't tortured and mutilated as a part of this ritual to, like, I don't know, gain strength or drink blood or whatever it is, then what was the motive? Taking that aspect away removes those 3 from the case. In order to get a really good view of what I'm talking about, you'd have to see the injuries on the boys for yourselves and not just take my opinion on it. I'm not going to show them, but I will explain it a little bit just so that you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about and why I see this evidence completely different than I once did. Because I'll admit, even though for a long time I've always felt that the 3 were innocent, I could not get around the condition of the boys' bodies. And I thought, who could do this? And it was just always something that just didn't sit right with me. And you wonder, okay, like who did want to torture them? And being somebody on the scene to see that just initially with no context, you are just left with this heartbreaking sight of these boys. It would have been so heartbreaking to come across and to process and deal with. In terms of Stevie's injuries, there's one side of his face there's a lot of trauma going on there. There's also Chris Byers, who appeared to have his genitals mutilated. So coming across that would be so gut-wrenching, and you would need to think that back in this era, who could be responsible but some Metallica-loving, Satan-worshipping misfits. However, since convictions, there have been multiple independent experts who have seen the photos and been able to look at the evidence and see it as the injuries not even being inflicted by a human at all. So there was no ritual or torture session done to these boys. The area that they found was basically a gold mine for turtles. Everyone in that area knew that there were tons of them there. They even called one of the spots Turtle Hill. If you're like me, though, you're like, turtles did not do that. Especially when you see the injuries, because you're like thinking of turtles like Franklin. Like, he is a G. He's our friend. He's got his little backpack. He wears his little hat. He's friendly. He would never. But when you see the breeds of turtles that are in this area, you're like, Frank, are you okay, man? What happened to you? They have like sharp, long claws. They've got these like pointed, sharp little mouths and these like spikes on their backs. They're like Shredder meets Ninja Turtle. they're terrifying. And they will eat anything that they can get their little claws on. Well, not little, huge claws on. You seriously have to see a video of these guys eating and like snapping and using their like claws to like rip and gain access. Once you see it, like there is like weight behind that bite. Like it's not like a little snap. Like you can see like there is weight behind that jaw. And when you see that, you're like, you little mother effer. To me, it made so much sense because the injuries, they're different depths, they're different widths, they're rigid. Like there's no consistency to them. And there's no cleanliness, I guess, is kind of like the word that I'm saying. I think back on like the Jodi Arias case. She used a knife and she attacked Travis Alexander. And when you see those injuries, it's just like it's clean. This is like uneven terrain. It's been argued that sticks that were found near the bodies that were used to conceal their clothes from floating up. So there were sticks that were like pushed in the mud to keep the clothes from floating up and like finding the bodies sooner. I've read that those sticks were used to also inflict some of the wounds, and that's why there's like no rhyme or reason to them. But nowhere have I seen a report that there was any skin found on the sticks. I've never seen that there was fragments of bark or anything like that in the wounds on the boys. And just looking at the extent of the injuries, it doesn't to me look like a stick was possible. Same goes for the injury to the groin. This was not a slice, it was degloved, meaning the skin around the bone is gone, and a stick couldn't do that. Plus, there were cuts and scratches up in the upper groin area, which to me seemed like an animal, like trying to like get at that area and like have a better grip to like tug and tear. And maybe for me, I just find this theory much more believable because it brings me back to the Crowley case. In that case, we talked about animal predation because there were areas of the bodies that appeared to be mutilated and were missing. And I learned so much more about animal instincts in that case. One of the main things being that an animal will go for the easiest point of access that requires like the least amount of effort. For the boys, they were undressed, and it's believed that they were undressed so that animals could have no problem accessing the bodies and hoping to destroy evidence, consume the bodies before they were found. I think regardless of whether you are undressed or not, though, the face usually is the area that is always gone for the most, and it's just because we have points that like stick out, so an animal can just gain access easier, like where the brow is raised, the nose, the lips, the ear, like your cheekbones. And when you look at Stevie's photos, this area here, that is what's been targeted. For me, when I saw Stevie's lips, that was the biggest seller for me. Like it so clearly looked like a bite and like a pull. And for him, it was only done on one side of his face, which to me fits the evidence because the boys were found face down in the mud, almost like pressed in there to like hold the bodies down. So it makes sense why the other boys' faces might not have been touched because they could have actually been fully face down, where Stevie's head appears to have been slightly tilted. So that area is just all exposed and vulnerable. Each of these independent experts also said that each of these injuries appeared to be post-mortem, so the boys were not alive when it happened. But for the expert at trial, that's not how he saw it. And like I mentioned in the last video, when you are a juror on a case like this, you just take a professional's word for it. And not to say that it was done maliciously, but this isn't the first time that an expert has been blinded by an idea and only seen evidence one way. It happens a lot. My personal opinion is that's what happened here. When you also pair that with having witnesses come forward with damning testimony, it's not surprising at all that the three were found guilty. I don't want to go too into the witnesses that recanted because I don't want to make this like an attack about them or anything like that. I don't know people's stories. I don't know the past. I don't know the reasons why they felt compelled or pressured to say what they did. And as of today, they have attempted to right their wrongs. Just briefly touching on it though, just to give some context and to see why, if you read through the court transcripts, it sounds really damaging. But then when you know the story behind the confessions, for example, one of the witnesses being approached by police to cooperate and like stage situations that didn't make the guys look good, it puts things into perspective. One woman named Vicky Hutchinson, she was an acquaintance of Jesse's, and they wanted her to be the nail in the coffin for Damien, and they wanted her to do it by getting close to him and trying to get a confession out of him. During her testimony, she testified that Damien had invited her to a satanic meeting where children were involved and unclothed. She says, though, that she didn't get close enough to what was going on, and that when she found out what was going on, she asked to leave, and that Jesse, Miss Kelly, who also was there, decided to stay, but that Damien drove her home. I guess this story was just meant to really seal the deal that there were rituals that were taking place within the town. She also further confirmed this by saying that her son, who was friends with two of the boys, said that they would go out to the woods and they would hide in this lookout point, and that there was always like 5 men in the woods who would sing around a fire and chant in what they felt was Spanish. And she says that he told her he thinks he saw them performing a ritual on the boys on that night when he was spying. The entire tone of her testimony is centered around these situations that she was brought into by either Damien or Jesse, and they all have this like satanic dark undertone to them. She references like a dragon pendant that Damien had, and she said she thinks that it meant something evil. She also said that Damien told her she should get a Black Widow tattoo when she was asking for tattoo ideas, and she said she didn't know what that was about, but she knew Black Widows were evil, so this was like, you know, his way of suggesting that she put like an evil mark on her. Regardless, in 2004, she recanted her statement. She said that the police reached out to her and wanted to stage a meeting after the murders took place. She knew Jesse, so they said, you need to take that connection and you need to get close to Damien. So they send her on this like sting operation to play this role of being interested in learning more about this like culty lifestyle. They bought her books to like have laid out in her apartment so that when Damien got there, it looked like she was, you know, into that lifestyle. So she agrees to go along with it. She sets up a video camera, stages this meeting, and during it, she asks Damien if he was responsible for the deaths, and he said, absolutely not. I wouldn't be that stupid, is what he said. What's interesting is he also told her that, you know, people saw him as this like evil, dark person, and that he admitted to saying that he drank people's blood as a mechanism to keep people from prying into his life. When she recanted her statement, she said that at that moment, she knew in her heart that he didn't do it, but she just wanted to cooperate, turned the tapes over to the police. But funny enough, they were never used. The police said that they were of poor quality, aka he didn't confess, and obviously it was believable enough for her to know that he didn't do it and just like have this guilt aching in her. And coincidentally, they went missing not long after this. When she recanted, she admitted that she knew by doing so she was perjuring herself, so there's a possibility that she was going to spend time in jail, but it was just the right thing to do. And in her words, she was a big liar and lied on the stand. Her quote was, "I lied instead of trusting in God. I was raised in a Pentecostal home and knew to do right, but instead I let the West Memphis Police Department scare me to death." Her son also recanted the statements that he made to police about seeing men participating in rituals, and he believes that just came from mind games being played on him as like a trick from the police department. Another testimony that came from a guy that spent time with Jason in a child detention center while they were waiting for trial. He says that him and Jason weren't friends. Jason was very quiet, but allegedly confessed to this crime the first time they talked. The second time they talked. Basically, his version is the first time that he ever saw Jason, you know, everyone was like sitting around a table and it was like, yeah, like, did you do it? He was like, no. And then he asks a little while later on a separate day, he's like, did you do it? And then all of a sudden Jason, who's this quiet, isolated, shy person that he's just explained, comes out and tells him, yeah, he did it. And he goes into detail that just doesn't even fit the evidence. Again, though, if you're a juror, you're taking people's word for it, especially when it's this like big theatrical moment. He has since apologized to Jason. He said he didn't know why he did what he did. His only explanation is that when he was younger, he was on a lot of drugs. With this testimony, I feel like it should have just never even been an issue at all. He should have never been called as a witness because the youth counselor had called investigators and tipped them off, saying that she believed he was going to be coming there with some story and that he wasn't to be trusted. And she knew this because I guess a conversation had taken place between her and him and possibly several other kids that were in this detention center, and she was letting them know that Jason was arriving at the facility and just kind of like back context on the rumors that were swirling around him. Keyword rumors. And so it looks like he just kind of used that to his advantage to, I guess, keep something in his back pocket. He, when he was younger, was known as somebody to get in a lot of trouble. So he definitely had a motive to want to like offer up information and cooperate with investigators. And it's just unfortunate to see this type of railroading going on because you'd think that this professional, this counselor, her voice and words would be taken over his, who I would believe would not be as reliable as her. And on the surface, all you're given are these devastating photos of 3 innocent babies, and you react appropriately, which is to want to bring them justice. And it's even easier to make those decisions when Damien himself did not do himself any favors. He sat there so arrogant in trial, brushing his hair, smirking, giving the middle finger to the media. He would scoff at witnesses, but he had a shitty attitude, and it came across very cold. It came across like he had no empathy for the boys. But when you're this angsty shit disturber, that's not where your mind is going. All of that is aside, you believe there's no possible way that anybody's going to believe you did this. There's no evidence linking you to it. And you'd be found innocent and be like, I friggin' told you so. Like, you've got this air about you. I'm not gonna lie, I probably would have too if I saw the evidence that was brought against me. Things like a dot of blue wax that they said was found on the shirt of one of the victims that resembled a blue candle found in Damien's girlfriend's room. They said they found a fiber of a shirt that had similar properties to a shirt that Jason's mother had on Stevie's clothes, and then another similar fiber that matched a t-shirt that Damien owned. And this was found on Michael's Cub Scout uniform and maybe on his hat. But it's followed up with, they can't say it came from these particular garments or wax, with exclusion of all others. A fiber in a shirt is a fiber in a shirt. A wax candle is a wax candle. And when people are buying their home decor items or their clothes, all from the same stores, can you imagine how fibers of similar properties of your shirt could be out anywhere in the area you live because people are shopping at the same stores as you? Or just wearing like a cotton shirt because you're wearing a cotton shirt? Like, another piece of evidence was a knife that Jason Baldwin owned at one point. And they said this knife wasn't even used to stab anybody. It was used to rake scratches across the boy's body. I guess this is supposed to tie into like this whole torture thing. When I see the scratches though, they aren't like perfectly spaced like this knife is. Like, it's got like these ridges in it. So if it was used to like scratch, you'd have like really nice clean scratches. And they're scratches. There's like no rhyme or reason to them. They're not clean. They're not evenly spaced. I see them fitting the turtle theory of the turtle trying to like get a grip. If I'm honest though, the knife for a period of time was one of the pieces of evidence that I had the most questions about. The story behind it is that during Jason's interview, his mom had offered up to the investigators that at one point Jason had owned a knife, and she felt like it was very inappropriate for him to have, and it was about a year prior to the murders happening. She had taken it, and behind their trailer park there was like a pond, and she threw it in the pond so that he couldn't have access to it. After she shares this information, the detectives stage this media skeptical. They reach out to reporters and photographers, and they say they have a hunch they're going to find something huge involved in this case. So the news reporters show up, photographers show up, this diver goes in. He's in there for about 30 minutes and he comes up with a knife in hand. So conveniently, the camera crews are there to catch it. And this guy later tells people he was told where the knife should be based on Jason's mom's account of where she threw it, but he's not told that anyone said where to go. This is where the hunch was, and they think it's gonna look something like it looked. Initially, though, the reasons I had questions about it was, I guess we have no way of knowing if his mom actually did throw it in a year prior. What makes me believe that it wasn't something used in the crime was that she was never brought in as a witness to testify about it. And I feel like if they actually believed that it was involved, they would have had her go on the stand and try to like catch her in a lie saying, oh, you said you got rid of this a year prior, but really somebody saw Jason with it days after the crime and you're trying to cover up for your son. So that never happened. Also, them saying they felt like it was a hunch, it's like they also knew she was telling the truth. I feel like if they would have brought her up there, her story would be believed by jurors, and then it would cause reasonable doubt because now this weapon that they feel is involved wasn't actually. At one point, the bottom of the knife has also been used to say that it fits those deeper gashes that look like bite marks. And when I first saw the photos, I was like, okay, maybe this does make more sense because I never felt like they looked like knife wounds. And then it was after me hearing about the independent experts talk about animal predation, then that all made sense to me. On top of that, there's no evidence left behind on the knife, and it just didn't make sense to me why you would only use like the bottom of the knife, which actually had like a detailed pattern in it, and that's what they said matched with some of like the inconsistencies of like marks on the face. I would assume that if you're doing that much damage, some piece of evidence would be left behind within those ridges, and it wasn't. And why would you never use the blade at all? Like, you're only using the knife to use the bottom of it and then just to use the side to like make scraping marks. Like, it just, but then you're gonna use sticks instead to stab the kids and like mutilate them. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So everything just draws me back to animal predation. On top of the evidence that's made out to look this way, you also have a doctor testifying that he's a specialist in the occult. And he testifies like things about books that were found in Damien's possession and that he's seen satanic worshipers read these books. One of which he was focusing a lot on was Wiccan, so not satanic. Awkward. You're a specialist and you don't know the difference. Another book that was used was one that Damien had picked up at a bookstore sale. It was like $1 or something like that. And he said he thought it was like out there and he was going to add it to his collection. Listen, if my book choices and my Google search history was ever used against me, I would fear for my damn life. And so should you, because you're here watching this, which means that you also have interest in cases like this. And I'm sure you also will pull up Google to look into something a little bit deeper that I've touched on and you want to learn more about it. And I mean, this right here is proof that something like that'll get you behind bars. I guess with this one book, there was something in it that was underlined that had like a reference to blood. And they're all like so obsessed with like Damien's blood thing. So the doctor interprets this as Damien being interested in blood sacrifices. But it turns out that this book actually, since it was secondhand, it was used as a report for somebody else. And there was a lot of things that were underlined in it. There were notes throughout it, on the front, on the back of the book. So Damien said it wasn't even him to begin with that did it. There is one thing that I can't explain. It's one thing that I would love to hear an explanation about from Jesse. And it's a bottle of Evan Williams whiskey that was found underneath a bridge in the area. Jesse is the one who led people to this, allegedly, and he said that he drank this bottle after the crimes were committed to get drunk. It doesn't tie him to the crime in any way, but it's something descriptive from him placing him in that vicinity, like tying a reason to why it's there. I guess the argument could be that kids did this every night. I mean, even in the woods, it was a very popular area for the teens to go and drink and smoke and get high without their parents knowing and seeing. So there's the possibility that he could have been the one to dispose of that on a night that he was drinking, and he needed something descriptive for the confession that was going to be able to like link him to it and like make him believable. Or it could mean he really did drink it after the crimes, and that's the truth. The bottle itself isn't tied to the crimes in any way though. There's no DNA on it, there's no fingerprints, no blood, nothing like that. But it's used to say, oh, this was a descriptive story that ties him into that area that day. Another story that I read that I would see would totally suck somebody in and probably turn them into a believer that they're guilty was that allegedly an luminol test was done. I guess Jesse had told investigators a rough area of where these crimes, this ritual was carried out and where they'd be able to find blood evidence. And so investigators apparently go to this area, do a luminol test, and it, quote, lit up like a Christmas tree. That's always the quote, hey? Like, lit up like a Christmas tree. The drama. Despite it lighting up like a Christmas tree, there's no blood found. There's no evidence anywhere. And the argument is that it was washed away by environmental elements. But my question is, the area was searched that night. It was searched the next morning, and it was searched that afternoon when the boys were found. The only thing that makes sense to me on how that crime scene could be cleaned of any speck of blood or DNA evidence linking these boys to the crime would be that all the Wiccan books that Damien reads and the magic that he believes he possesses works so damn well that he was able to make it disappear and be back at his house in order to be on a phone call with his friends around 9 o'clock. I've seen no evidence that there was blood or that it was human. We're in the woods. Animals eat themselves and each other. Not themselves. Animals eat each other every day. That's how they eat. I've also not seen anything that says this test ties to DNA leading to the boys. And the reason there was no blood evidence found there was because there was no sacrifice that was done. There was no torture that was done. There was no mutilation that was done. The injuries that they sustained fit with it happening post-mortem. I just cannot believe that there would be blood, enough blood, that would light up an area like a Christmas tree, wash away, leaving no speck or trace behind before people were out there that same evening looking for the boys. I just feel like anytime something leads to another suspect pool even, or reasonable doubt, none of that evidence was ever properly tested. One prime example was a tip that was called in from a manager at a Bojangles restaurant, and this is called the Mr. Bojangles theory. On the night of the murders, a man is found in a Bojangles restaurant. He's found in the women's washroom by a mother and daughter, and he's got mud on him, and he also has blood on him. I guess they ask him to leave, and he's just like in this like state of shock, almost like he's not responding to them and just like quiet and creepy. So they go and they get the manager. The manager comes in, eventually gets him to leave, but the manager calls the police. However, when the police are called, they don't even go into the washroom. They don't see this man. They don't question anybody. And it's the next day that two detectives come and then they take some scrapings off the wall that they believe were blood evidence. But they never get sent in for testing because they lost them. Now, I personally don't believe that this man had anything to do with the crimes. I do find it interesting, though, that whoever this is has never come forward and been like, yo, that was me. I just got in like a tiff with so-and-so. You know, he could have been a drifter. He could have cut his arm on a tree. Like, we don't know the story there. So it'd be interesting to know what actually went down. And I mean, I guess without knowing that and without that evidence being tested, we don't 100% know whether he did or didn't have anything to do with it. I just don't believe that he did, but I do find it interesting that in investigators' mind, it just was like, yeah, no, like, it's the guys, it's the boys. We don't even need to test the evidence. So without hearing all of those other theories and not really getting like a deeper sense of what could have possibly happened or have any reasonable doubt, it's not surprising, given the light that these boys were painted in, that they were found guilty and that Damien was sentenced to death. I believe that they would still be in jail had it not gained a lot of attention after a documentary was made called Paradise Lost. For reference, I watched the Paradise Lost trilogy with a bit of a guard, I guess I would say. In fact, this whole second film is pointed at trying to prove that Chris Byers' adoptive father was potentially the person who did this, which we now know wasn't. So I don't believe everything I hear and see in the documentaries. I do know the documentaries are more biased to one side, which I've been accused of being for watching them, but I try to like watch them, take pieces that I feel like fit my beliefs, and I'm open to, but I've also read through other people's arguments that don't fit mine, and some of them I'm like, yeah, that's a good question. What this documentary did though was it did gain a lot of attention specifically for celebrities. So people like Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, Johnny Depp, the lead singer from the Dixie Chicks, Peter Jackson. They all hopped on board, and it was almost like they felt they were like joining the defense team. They invested a lot of years, a lot of time, a lot of money into trying to find different ways to prove their innocence. From what I feel from those who believe that these guys are still guilty when it comes to the celebrities, they feel like they've got something to gain from all of this, so they shouldn't be trusted. But I don't understand it really, because it's not like they need the attention. They're already doing really well for themselves. They've already got their own attention. But when it comes to the celebrities, I felt like I was dealing with like QAnons. For the people who were coming for me saying that I was like drinking the Kool-Aid and getting caught up in this and like just going like ballistic on me. If anything, I see it as like a little bit more damaging to their careers though, because this case is so controversial. So, you know, you've got a whole side of people who believe that they're guilty that you're not making friends with. So like those movie ticket sales and those concert ticket sales, like those are plummeting in a demographic that you probably might have had support from if you like just stayed unbiased. Regardless though, they did believe that they were innocent. So they funded a lot of testing that the defense team did to try to get them out of jail. And one thing they were able to do was hire a private investigator. This investigator was able to look at hair evidence that was found in the ligature on Michael Moore. And the hair had properties that didn't match any of the three men that were in jail. However, it did match somebody known to the boys. This happened to be Terry Hobbs, who was Stevie Branch's stepfather. There was also a hair that was found in the vicinity on a tree stump that matched an acquaintance of the family named David Jacoby. Before even going into this, I want to say that this is not 100% conclusive, 1 out of a billion match. For Terry, it was 1 in 900. And for David, it was even lower. It was like 1 out of 4 or 300. David did admit to being one of the people that was in the area searching for the boys. So that could make sense why his hair was found on a tree stump within the area. It was not on any of the boys' clothing. It was not in a ligature, nothing like that. After seeing him speak out in a documentary that I watched called The Forgotten Three, I really don't believe that he had anything to do with it. It's the most recent interview that I've seen him do and the rawest, I feel, in my opinion. Like, my heart ached. I feel like if you've seen it, you know what I mean. If you haven't and you do watch it, you'll probably feel the same way. So back to this team looking into it. On February 24th, 2007, they show up at Terry's house, I think with the intention to get DNA without him knowing it. And he invites this private investigator in to talk. And she says that she couldn't deny that he was a likable guy. He shared a little bit about his life, a little bit about Stevie and his marriage to Pam. And then at one point he excuses himself to go to the washroom, and she notices some cigarette butts left behind in the ashtray. So she scoops those up, takes them to the lab, CSIs those bad boys, and that's what comes back as a possible match against this hair that's in the knot. Again, not 100, 1 in 900. So statistically within the town of West Memphis, something like 30 people would also share those same DNA properties. There's apparently another hair that's in the ligature, and that was never tested. I don't have the answers for why it hasn't. I feel like if it was, though, and again, it was like the same match or higher, if it had like more DNA within it, and again, it also matched Terry to some capacity, it just like heightens the chances of them having like something more concrete leading to him. Because right now the argument is that having a hair on the shoelace that was used as this ligature doesn't prove guilt because it could have been secondary transfer. Michael Moore spent time at the Branch household, so Terry's hair could have got there from him taking his shoes off at the front door and it just like falling on it, which is true. It could happen. But then when you have like 2 of them in that knot, the likelihood of those like hairs falling and just like going into that space that is going to eventually be knotted, it's not as high. Now they're left with these results, but of course, like nothing's easy. Since it wasn't taken voluntarily, it's pretty much useless. They need his permission or they need to obtain it if he's left it abandoned somewhere in public. He is confronted and said, eliminate yourself since you're denying being involved is to provide a voluntary sample, but he turns that opportunity down. What they do is they take this evidence and they go to the police to share it, and they realize at this point that Terry was never even interviewed. So the defense side is like, how is the stepfather of one of these children never interviewed or looked at? Like interview 101. You start with the people closest to the family. And he wasn't. So now all eyes are on them. They bring Terry in for questioning. And this is like the most laid back interview ever. It's just like 2 people talking like old friends. And anything Terry says, it just appears like his word is just God. Like there's no question. He's, oh, you weren't there? Great. All we need to know. Thanks for coming in. We'll see you later. The story he gives police is that he was worried for Stevie when he didn't come home at 4:30. But like we talked about in part 1, in that first hour, he and Pam weren't too concerned. This was something that was common in those days with children. You know, your curfew was always missed because you're left to rely on like when the sun goes down or the street lights come on. So he takes Pam to work. And then after he gets home and he sees Stevie's still not back and like an hour passes, he's still not there. He says that he was getting concerned. He was looking in the area. He went to the family friend David Jacoby's house, asked if he had seen Stevie. David said no. He asked if he wanted to come in and wait to see if he turned up. So Terry goes in. I guess they played guitar for about a half an hour, 15 minutes. And Terry says he's got to get back out there, wants to look for Stevie. So David goes with him. They look around for about 15 minutes. They don't find anything. He drops David back off at his house. And I guess he says he's going to go look in a different area, kind of around where the woods are located. David says he's gone for maybe another 15 minutes, comes back to his house, asks if he wants to keep looking with him. So he does. Again, they don't find anything. And then Terry goes to pick up Pam. What's interesting about that is that when he picks her up, he doesn't tell her that Stevie's missing. It's actually their daughter, Amanda, that tells Pam. And they make the phone call to the police from the restaurant, and they wait for the police to come there to speak with them. There is a lot of speculation that this was done because he didn't want the house searched, because he didn't have time to like dispose of clothes that were dirty or wash them. For me, that's kind of reaching on that side that's trying to prove that Terry Hobbs did it. I feel like it's just speculation. Regardless, in this more recent interview, everything that Terry says, they're like, cool, you're good to go. And I just find it really interesting because someone whose DNA matches a profile of 1 in 900 is found within a ligature on one of the boys. You just thank them and believe them 100%. But to this day, 3 men who have no DNA, who have been claiming their innocence to this day, they are not to be trusted. And it's not to say that I think Terry's guilty, because we don't know. I just don't like that those boys who had nothing tying them to the crimes besides speculation of a satanic ritual happening and a confession from someone who I believe, in my personal opinion, sounded very coerced, and witness statements that have now been recanted, that's what they have that ties them to this. Even though there's not enough to charge Terry, the defense team still feels like it's only the right thing to do to present this to a judge and the new district attorney, and at least hope for the opportunity of a retrial. They bring this evidence to them in 2008. Unfortunately, at that time, the judge that was on the case makes the decision that the three will remain in jail and that no new trial will be granted. Luckily for the defense, Judge Burnett was also running for Senate, which was a huge advantage for them because if he was elected, it meant he wasn't allowed to have anything to do with the case anymore. 2 years later, in 2010, he was elected, is what I was meaning. He was elected. On top of that, Terry Hobbs also decided to sue the lead singer of the Dixie Chicks, Natalie Maines, which turned out to be a benefit because when he did that, he had to go testify for this case against her, which opened him up to cross-examination during this deposition. And for context, he was suing Natalie Maines because he alleged that she insinuated that he was guilty, so he was suing her for defamation of character involving this case. When I watched the deposition, I could see where that private investigator was coming from, where you initially do see him as quite charismatic, I guess, likable. He seems like a regular, just trustworthy dad. But then when you start learning about him, you see that he's not really like who he portrays. In the 80s, he was charged by a neighbor. I guess she had confronted him one evening because she heard a huge fight going on with him and his wife at the time. And she goes over because she's like, I can't hear this abuse go on any longer. And it really pissed him off. Obviously, if you've got that type of personality, you don't want to be questioned, especially by a woman. So he doesn't like that she's involved himself. And then a month later, she finds him after she gets out of the shower in her suite. He's broken in and he's coming towards her, and she says that he's telling her to be quiet and reaches out and gropes her breast. She's screaming. She's repeatedly shouting at him to get out, leave her alone. As she's getting louder, he does book it out of there. She calls the police, gives them her statement. When the police go to Terry, he just stone-faced says that never happened. Needless to say, he's not painted in the best light during this deposition, but it also doesn't prove that he's a murderer. So the defense team need to forge on forward. So they go back to court with the approach that this evidence has been retested with the newest technology, and it shows that it doesn't match any of these three guys. They also come across potential jury misconduct that happened in that earlier trial. I guess a juror was accused of discussing the case with an attorney before reaching a verdict. So with two of these things on their side, they were able to make a case for an appeal. It still takes 4 years, though, for any deal to be worked out. And I think it's because neither side want to admit any wrongdoing. The prosecutor surely does not want to admit that they did not get it wrong, and the defense isn't going to give up fighting for their clients who have been maintaining their innocence. So they make a very tough decision, but putting myself in their shoes, I can completely understand why they brought this deal to the prosecutors. The deal was for the three of them to take Alford pleas, and on August 19th, 2011, Damien, Jason, and Jesse were able to be released from jail by not pleading guilty, but acknowledging that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict them. The way I've seen those who believe that they're guilty look at this is just it reaffirms that they are guilty. I've seen the argument if someone was innocent, they would never take this deal, but I don't agree. These guys spent 18 years in jail for something they said that they've never done. And the law moves so slowly. So as much as they want evidence to be retested with the newest technology, it doesn't work that easily. You need all parties to agree, which right now, the district attorney isn't agreeing to do. Well, not that he's not agreeing to it. He's just blatantly just ignoring everybody on all sides. Not only is the defense asking for evidence to be retested, so is Stevie Branch's mom, Pam. And everybody's request is just being ignored. And this deal also wasn't something that they just like jumped on and took. Damien and Jesse more so did agree to it pretty fast, but Jason didn't. He did not want to admit that he was guilty. He did not want to say, I admit guilt, but I'm maintaining my innocence because I can acknowledge that the prosecution has enough to keep me in jail. It took him a lot of time to consider, and ultimately he said that he decided to do it because he needed to save Damien. He heard that Damien was not doing well in jail. He had spent 10 years in solitary confinement and his health was deteriorating. And so for him, he thought he couldn't do that to him just to hold on to the hope of full exoneration, and that he was going to promise to continue doing everything that he could to prove his innocence outside of jail. To me, it just doesn't make sense why the district attorney wouldn't want that DNA retested and agree to it when he's got the defense and Stevie's mother really pushing for it. The way I see it, like, everybody involved has nothing to lose. If he's so certain that he had the right people in jail, then this would just reaffirm it if their DNA came back. And if it shows and ties to somebody else, then you're getting justice for Michael, Stevie, and Christopher, which is what this case is about, and they have been forgotten in this. The avoiding and dodging and ghosting people to get that DNA retested, it makes no sense to me. I don't understand it. And all I've seen, and why I guess I stay kind of true to believing that they're innocent, is that the defense team is the only side that I see just like begging to have things reinvestigated and looked into. And you'd think that after they got out, if they were guilty, they'd be like, whoa, like, dodged that bullet, lost 18 years, but we've got all this time in front of us, and stay as far away from the case as they could to not, like, risk having no questions asked about them, being guilty. I just feel like until that can be done and like egos can be pushed aside, we're just going to be in this limbo. With everything here, I think one thing that I always go back to is Jesse's alibi and why I don't hold any weight to the confession that he made. Jesse said that he was at a wrestling match 40 miles away. Many people saw him there, yet they're unreliable. And I don't understand why so many people are so unreliable and why his confession is so reliable when he needed to be led to it repeatedly. And yes, although he did repeat it a number of times, he's also recanted far more, and to this very day has recanted that statement. Yet because he confessed to it at one point in his life, that's the only reliable thing he's said. So I don't know, there's just something about his alibi and this wrestling match that I always go back to, because if he was there, they didn't do it. I have reached out to Damien's team to see if there's anything that we can do on our part to push to have this evidence retested. I think, like I said, like it's just a benefit for all parties involved. If they are saying that they're innocent, then this will prove it. If the prosecution is saying they're guilty, then this should prove it. So that's the only way that we can get answers. I haven't heard back though, so if and when I do, I will keep you guys posted. But as of today, they're just trying to do their best to adjust to life outside of jail. It sounds like it hasn't been something easy at all. They all had to learn how to like use cell phones, adjust to being in like public places, use the internet. It just seems like such a surreal process to like digest when it's something that we just take for granted and know like the back of our hands. Damien talks a lot about like his religious beliefs on his platforms, which is like he calls it magic with a K. It sounds like a blend of Buddhism, Reiki, Hinduism. Again, those who believe that he's guilty, they focus a lot on this because again, like his spiritual beliefs are not the norm. So still a lot of like character assassination I see. I don't care if he follows Willy Wonka and the chocolate covered Oompa Loompas. Like, do what you need to do, man. He also brings a lot of attention to other people who are wrongly convicted. So does Jason Baldwin. Jason actually started his own nonprofit called Proclaim Justice. As for Jesse, he stays very much out of the public eye. I don't even think he has a cell phone. So he's doing his best to just remain very private. But yeah, that's where we are at. And that is all that I have for you guys today. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear them respectfully, please. I can appreciate that there are definitely two different sides to this case, but don't just like scream and point fingers and bash people. It's not a good look, okay? Just be nice. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you again to our friends over at NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget to check out their link in the description and come and watch some Love Island with me. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. You know I love and appreciate you so, so much. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you so much. Until then, you guys, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.